I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z Podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to D2Z, a podcast by using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm a Gen Z entrepreneur, Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of Retention as a Service agency, Electric. And today I'm talking with Arvind Krishnan, CEO of shopper engagement platform, Swym, and actually one of the new tech partners that we're rolling out in 2023 for Electric. So really excited to have you here, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, excited to be here, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into some of the key topics that we wanted to discuss today, could you give everybody just a quick background on yourself as well as Swym?
Sure. So my name is Arvind, like Brandon said. Had a long career in the tech industry, spent a little over a decade at Microsoft, building software products across the stack, and then spent some time at Yahoo in the search business and paid search in particular. And eventually moved on to mobile advertising. And that was the genesis for Swym. So founded Swym with a friend of mine. We'd worked together for a few years back in 2012 with the goal of making shopping a lot more personalized than it traditionally was. And here we are 10 years down the road.
That's awesome. I think it's really cool to see the evolution of Swym, because a lot of the sort of apps that we work with now, they're very much so just recently got started or only Shopify focused. So sort of where did Swym start, and then how have you gotten to current day Swym?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started out with a pretty abstract and open-ended goal of shopping needs to be a lot more personal. And our inspiration at that time was Flipboard, the magazine-like experience that revolutionized content consumption on the iPad. We were trying to reimagine shopping in a similar context. And the idea was that we make sense of what a particular shopper is looking for in terms of their intent, and taking content that was coming their way, but curating it and making it easier to consume, make it more presentable was the value prop. About a year in, we realized that building a B2C business, especially when the iPhone was just starting to explode and the typical app download was, north of $2 a download, we decided to make the switch to B2B, and then went through a number of pivots and failed experiments. And in 2016 is when we made the most of the Shopify momentum. And Shopify at that time was starting to truly take off, and we felt like a lot of the value proposition aligned. And that is how Swym came into being as far as the Shopify ecosystem is concerned. The vision itself hasn't really changed all that much, but the medium of how we get to shoppers is now through the merchant, through the brand, and through our tech and agency partners. But in terms of the value proposition, it's still intact.
Yeah, I noticed on the website, at least, you have quite a few technology partners as well as platforms. Do you view that as sort of an integral component of any app in the e-commerce industry? Or what was your thought behind sort of going wide versus going very deep? Because there's some tools that we work with where they only integrate with Klaviyo and they only integrate with Shopify. And that's obviously limiting in some regard, but then also you only have to focus on two relationships.
Yeah, so I mean, my initial instinct was, yes, it's an integral part. And then I heard you emphasize the every app, so that gave me room for pause. The way we think about the engagement platform, when we step back and think about how we actually function, we break it down into three parts. There's capture, which is try and make sense of the shopper's intent. So capture all the signals that you can to try to understand what it is that they're looking for. The second is try with that context to bring them back to the site. And then the third is convert. So when they do come back to the site, make sure that it's a productive, end to the journey for them and yields a conversion. And so in our case, making sure that we're bringing them back, making sure that we're, capturing as much of the signals that they're emitting as possible, makes it imperative that we try not to do it alone. And, the value proposition becomes a lot more wholesome, both to us and to the merchant, and of course, not to mention to the shopper, if we, think of this as a unified solution to the problem where one part of it is, managed by Swym, but it works, in cohesion with everything else that's on the stack as far as that merchant's concerned.
Yeah, and I think for us as an agency, it's really important that the tools that we work with all work with one another. Otherwise, we literally can't use it. Because if it's not talking to the proper systems or not integrated for Klaviyo, with Klaviyo as an example, then it's just not a realistic solution for us to be able to leverage for our clients. So
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
The other unique thing is, we got started pretty early, relatively early in the Shopify ecosystem, and virtually every single integration we've built was actually built because our customers demanded it, right? So initially, we just built the offering and made it easy for merchants to start using us, made it easy for agencies to start working with us. And as that input started to come in, exactly along the lines of what you're saying, which is, if you don't work with the tools that we already have, for example, if your app needs to send email, I don't want you to be sending the email. I want it to go through a Klaviyo or any other ESP I'm using. And so it became an imperative that we listen to that feedback and do what's needed to ensure that it worked well with the existing tools that they had. And naturally, that the volume of feedback that we get is directly proportional to which tools are more popular. And so it's sort of a scenario where the decision was made for us really on how we should think about integrations.
Got it. Yeah, really driven by the merchants. And I guess that leads me to a follow-on question, which is, how do you balance incorporating user requests and feedback into your product development roadmap while also still being able to focus on some longer term sort of strategic initiatives? What does that look like on your end? Because I'm sure, just like any other software company, you have customers asking for a million things all at once. So how do you incorporate that? Because I think it's important, but not get totally lost in just like chasing the next shiny object that a customer pushes your way.
Yeah, so maybe we've been fortunate, but those two haven't been that far off, right? And some of it is, I think, a reflection of the fact that we have a healthy number of Shopify Plus brands, and they really push us hard on the more sophisticated feature set. So one thing we do take a look at when we get any such feature request is, actually, we ask two fundamental questions. One, how strongly does this align with our vision and our value proposition and our promise to both the consumer, who we see as the end beneficiary, but also the merchant? And then two, does this represent, is there broader demand out there for this? And does it therefore add to the sum total value that we take back to our customer community, as opposed to just one merchant's ask? And more often than not, there have been some very rare instances where we've gotten requests that are so niche and so specific, and but the norm has been that it's generally a pattern and sends us in one direction where there is actually more demand. And it turns out that it becomes both a great customer acquisition tactic and a retention capability, because now the value that you've built, that the benefit accrues to a lot more customers than the one that just asked for it.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So one of the things I know we want to touch on today is how to improve conversion rates. And I guess, could you walk us through some of the Swym products and what you're working on your end in order to help enable merchants to do that? And then my follow-on question to that will be, how much does your team play an active role in customer success? Because I know with a lot of the other solutions we work with, just because a merchant downloads your app doesn't mean it's going to deploy itself or make an ROI. So like, where do you draw the line on helping versus like doing too much? Because obviously you want to make the solution sticky, but it needs to be generating results for it to be sticky.
Yeah. Oh, both really, really good questions. So let me start with the first one. We have 3 apps in the public domain now. We started with Wishlist Plus, which is our flagship. It's used by over 20,000 stores at this point, and launched August of 2016. It was actually something that we carved out of an existing platform that we had, and the idea behind carving that out was to try and be very, very specific in terms of the value prop that we take to our merchants and therefore to their shoppers. And so Wishlist Plus is the first one. We followed that up with a back in stock module, and that's the classic product is out of stock. Help your customers sign up to be notified either through email or SMS. and let them know when that product comes back in stock. So that's the second one that we added. That's got several thousand stores on it as well. And then more recently, less than a month ago, our third app got published on the App Store. It's a gift lists and registries app. So the idea is that if somebody's trying to put a list together and share that with friends and family, and then have them purchase off of that, maybe it's a baby registry, maybe it's a wedding registry, maybe it's housewarming, whatever the occasion might be, you're creating a list of items and sharing it with your circle and having them make that purchase for you. The common theme has always been driving convenience for the shopper and removing friction in their path, trying to get them to the point of purchase as quickly with as minimal an amount of friction as possible has been the emphasis. And all of our products, we have 3 more that we're working on that are in early stage, I would say. All of them follow the same principle of, are we reducing friction? Are we improving convenience? So that's the core driving factor for what we invest in terms of capabilities. Coming to your second question, I think one of the things that we recognized very early on, and again, we were, I think, fortunate to be early in the Shopify ecosystem. Feedback was pretty brutal at that point. If they didn't get the app to install the way they expected it to install, merchants uninstalled in a matter of seconds. And so we learned our lesson quickly. And one of the first teams I staffed up was our customer support team. And that turned out to actually be incredibly good fortune, because we started to deliver really good support. We started to use that feedback to make the product better, but it also resulted in a lot of reviews because of how responsive we were. And that quickly pushed us to the top of the charts as far as wish lists were concerned. And then there was no looking back at that point. A lot of our initial growth and validation in the ecosystem was actually led by that. But as we started to scale, and as more Plus brands started to come in, as more technology integration started to come in, and those partners started to engage with us, and we got a number of the leading agencies also to partner with us, one of the things that became apparent was we needed to start thinking about life beyond support. Like, support was a reactive function, and we needed to get more proactive about it. So we spun off a customer success function. And the goal of the customer success function was the North Star that we all look at is, how much money did we make for our merchants across every single function we have? And customer success, that group is sort of the torchbearer of that mandate. And they go talk to customers, they understand what their requirements are, and they make sure that our capabilities are aligned with the goals that the customer has. And in a lot of cases, the conversation actually might be not confined to just our apps. It could be much broader. It could be about how do we personalize our marketing, et cetera. And so that function is now scaled nicely. We only offer it for our enterprise plans because there's a certain level of there is, of course, a cost involved on our side, but there's also a certain level of sophistication on the brand side to be able to take advantage of that. And more recently, about a year ago, to your point, we recognized that even customer success is maybe coming too late in the game. And so we spun off a customer onboarding function. So today, our customer experience team is actually 3 teams. It's customer support, which is for reactive technical support, customer assistance sort of thing. Customer success, and their goal is to make sure that we maximize value for our customers through our products. And then customer onboarding, we think of that as the first 30 days of a customer's experience with us. And we make sure that they exit that 30-day window with all of their metrics looking in stellar shape, and the handoff to customer success happens at that point for the ongoing engagement.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I think that is something I've been talking more and more with our tech partners around, is ensuring even the first week, like, super important in terms of the customer relationships, making sure it gets off on the right track. And so we've even worked with a few of our partners around what's essentially termed as like a launch package. Mm-hmm. So they're telling the merchant, hey, here's this special offer from Electric. They'll come in and actually like deploy this app across your entire customer journey in the way that it needs to be done. So if you don't have the resources to do it, like, they'll just come in and do it. And then for us, it just allows us to maybe 10% of that business will then become recurring for us, whereas a lot is just one time, but it's still good to be able to help and support the tech partners. So it's really beneficial in that sense.
Awesome. It's nice to know that it's that dialogue's going both ways. That's awesome. And I think the other understated benefit is it actually helps retention quite a bit. It helps upsell, because once that credibility is established, like you're saying, and they know that we're in their corner and we're not just trying to extract every dollar out of them, the conversation changes. It's really about, recognizing that, hey, if they're successful, we're all going to be okay. And so the entire focus shifts to making sure that, we're maximizing the odds of that success.
Yeah. And I think it's really unique how you are able to continue to build out like products in your suite that are complementary in nature. And I'm seeing more and more of a trend from other software providers that we work with around getting wider with their product service offering, because merchants are demanding more and more sort of a bundled approach and a bundled offer. And 3 years ago, you did have like 50 apps and they all did one thing and they would integrate together, so to speak, and slow your site down tremendously. But now we're moving towards merchants would rather just have like 10 apps or even fewer, but they're doing more than just one point solution. So
Totally.
I'm excited to see what those next 3 products are that you have coming out in the near future.
Yeah, and our partners have been great, right? And it is truly a collaboration because we make certain assumptions, we start building out, and both in terms of the user experience and in terms of the value proposition, just getting that validation and going through that early feedback cycles has been super helpful. Not investing too much early on, building it out only to realize that what we built is actually not something that the merchants are going to benefit from. And so
and you already have that existing customer base to tap into for that direct feedback. And I think the Shopify ecosystem, the merchants in general, are super open to new products and testing. And I'm shocked at how easy it is to get merchants to sign up for like a beta program. But it makes sense. I think it's really cool. And like if you're a brand that, especially as the competition has never been higher in e-commerce. So like, let's say you're a coffee company, and there's a lot of D2C coffee brands. And so how do you create a differentiated experience for the customer? I mean, sure, at a baseline, there's product quality, but once you get to a certain threshold, everybody has that product quality. Yeah. So it's like, how do we differentiate? It's branding, it's the customer experience, it's the solutions and tools that are being leveraged to create that. So I think it's the right mindset to almost be like, yeah, I want to try every beta because I'm going to have something that others don't. And that's how we look at selecting our new tech partners as well. Because obviously we don't want to have like 100 tech partners, then we don't have any real relationships and we're not truly experts in any solution. But like for us, it's what's that new product that's going to complement our existing efforts and make the return outsized. And so then once we see that, it's just like, let's deploy it as quickly as possible, because in 2 or 3 years, every brand will be doing it.
Yeah. No, I love your approach. I see a lot of value, a lot of merit to, the very first time I heard about it, my immediate takeaway was, okay, this is awesome because Brandon's team's bar is going to be so high that, it's almost an aspiration for us to make sure that we make the mark, because we know that, that level of scrutiny, if it goes in, then you're going to exercise the same level of care and attention to your customers. And so, to be able to partner with somebody like that and drive home the value that we're so focused on creating, makes it that much easier, right? Like I don't have to worry about, are we going to be represented right to the brand, to the merchant? And that's a huge, benefit to have in our partner.
And for us, the talk track of all of our tech partners is like, you could just work with us individually. You could also just work with a tech partner on your own. But by working with the 2 of us, you're getting the 1 + 1 equals 3, because just how like your customer success team is only going to take things so far, and we're only going to be able to take things so far about the technology solution. But by having both, like we can stretch the product in a way that you're not even really incentivized to do, frankly. I mean, like as the agency, we're the ones that are supposed to really push the needle forward. And so even doing differentiated experiences like in Klaviyo, that's something that falls outside of the purview of almost any tech partner. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the match makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And you get almost aggregated feedback across 45, 50 merchants from us versus having to work with each one individually.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think people tend to underestimate the value of that until they start hitting the scale, right? And then it becomes, a no-brainer that, oh wow, that concentration of feedback is just, the signal strength is so much powerful, so much more powerful.
I think as we build out like our software product side of the business with the Drinks app, something I've been very focused on is the other Shopify Plus agency owners, because they just see so much on a daily basis. And it makes a lot more sense for me to be well connected to 10 of them versus being well connected to 10 individual merchants, because 10 of them gets me 100 merchants and then also gets me a sales army versus the merchant. There's no sales function there either. So like if I were to start a software company from the ground up, I would probably not even have a sales team. I'd be like, how do we align with some early strategic agency partners? And some of the tech companies that we work with right now who are really early on, they don't have like an outbound sales motion. It's purely word of mouth and referrals, but primarily driven through personal connections or through the agency, because those are going to be your best customers anyways. I feel like are the ones that are brought in warm versus sending 10,000 messages on LinkedIn or whatever and getting 3 people to reply to you. So.
It makes a ton of sense. I'm actually surprised that, back in 2017, 18, I was reasonably certain that there would be a group of software companies that are building products that are aimed at exactly that. Like, how do I get more agencies? How do I manage those partnerships? How do I allow those betas to happen? And I know it's happening today in somewhat asynchronous fashion and in maybe lots of manual ways. But it's something like Crossbeam, right? That was focused on the agency relationship and how you help that both gather feedback, influence your roadmap, that sort of thing. Maybe it'll happen. We'll see. I'm still holding out hope.
Crossbeam is an integral part of any of our partnerships now, because it gives us visibility into prospects, open opportunities, and mutual clients, so that we can, mutual clients, that's where we're developing co-marketing materials or making sure that there's a customer success function in place. And with our larger tech partners too, we have 25 clients with them, and then we have like a dedicated customer success manager from their team that we work with on an ongoing basis. And then like the open opportunities is how do we support one another in getting this across the line. And then for prospects, it's more of just seeing account overlap and potentially working on some sort of like outbound prospecting campaign. But before Crossbeam, I had no idea what was going on there. Where it's really painful is on the, and also to circle back on that, actually, integration's super important with any type of software, because Crossbeam integrates with Slack for me. So anytime we sign a new client in HubSpot, that quote then gets funneled into Crossbeam, which then pings me in Slack like, hey, you have an overlap with Kendo, Klaviyo, Rebuy, and Swym. Reach out to them. And so we take every brand through an audit process. And so when they sign that audit quote, I then immediately know these are the solutions that they're leveraging. So we'll reach out to those tech partners and ask them, hey, is there anything you'd like included in here? Like, is there what you've been working with them for 6 months? So are there things you've seen that they're not doing that they should be doing? And so you're getting this sort of like outsized return from having that. But on the referral side, like lead tracking and stuff like that, that's where I think there's still so much room for improvement. Because some of the tech partners we work with, they have custom platforms. Some of them have partner stacks. Some of them have different solutions, and it's just a nightmare, frankly, to actually like track and attribution and all that. But
exactly,
for us,
and I'd love for them to also, help handle feedback and communication loops with our partners, right? I'd love to be able to, pick my agency partners that I want to reach out to, like, let's say a cohort that I know is focused on a certain specialization, and say, here's what we're thinking about. Here's some early previews. Can we jump on a call and I'd love to walk you through this and get feedback and just manage that whole thing. Maybe it'll come, like I said. I certainly see the pain point. There's a lot of value and so much commerce flowing through these entities that it's inevitable, I think.
Yeah, I think right now everything I get is like SurveyMonkey or something that's completely separated from the experience. So definitely room for improvement for sure there.
Totally.
Maybe it can be a separate company that gets started. So 10 years is an impressive time for any company to be in business for that long. So what are some of the surprising learnings or things that you've come across that you were not necessarily expecting going into it, both from a product standpoint, but also just like building and starting your own company?
So I think I already touched on one, which is a lot of our product direction was actually influenced by customer feedback, continues to be the case. I told you about the gift registry app that we just built, that actually was because a lot of our wish list customers came in and said, hey, you guys have a wish list, you need to add a gift registry feature, and here's how it needs to work, and can you do that? And once we started seeing that consistent pattern in certain types of brands that were asking for it, the validation sort of took care of itself, and we just had to go build it. The same thing has happened to us in other areas as well. Like when we first published the wishlist app and started to get customers on it, we thought of it as a conventional wish list from a consumer perspective. But then there were scenarios that were high-touch sales. There were scenarios where there was collaboration. There were scenarios like B2B where the wish list actually is a requisition that goes through a workflow and finally becomes a purchase order. Every one of these list scenarios, when customers, when brands see the wish list app, they try to extend that wish list app to meet some of those objectives. And that's always giving us lots of product ideas on how do we extend the capabilities that we have, how do we, and in our case, we love working with our agency partners. And so we put a lot of emphasis on our APIs and our integrations, because not every scenario can be solved out of the box by us. It just doesn't scale very well. But if we can enable our partners to do that, and they own the experience on the front end, but we do the heavy lifting on the back end and make sure that it's all, the data integrity is maintained, and any sort of syncing with Shopify is handled by us. It makes it much easier, and creates a true win-win, right? So that's been one, is all of the input that we've gotten and how that's influenced our direction. I didn't think it was going to be as strong as it has been, and I do think it's a little unique to the Shopify ecosystem just because of the sheer number of merchants and partners that are in that ecosystem. The second was COVID, right? Like when COVID first hit, my first instinct was, oh my God, am I going to have to lay off my team, and how am I going to respond? And I think a week later, I was like, can I hire fast enough? And how are we going to keep up with this demand? And the world turned upside down for e-commerce in a matter of days. And that was, I never thought I would live through something like that. So that was interesting. And then the third, I think, is just, I feel like, Shopify has this unpopular task of managing the experience on behalf of merchants, playing fair to all the partners that are in there, and still doing the right thing as a platform. So some of the changes they're driving, through the App Store, for example, like making sure that your performance scores don't go over a certain threshold if you have to be favorably ranked within the App Store, making sure that the admin experience embeds nicely into the Shopify admin experience. I think those are changes that are, to be very honest, a little frustrating, because they take away valuable product cycles from the roadmap and have you do things that are, quote unquote, hygiene. But at the same time, when it's all done and then you look at the product, it's a lot more polished, it's a lot more integrated. And so I think our own maturity as a software company, I've been surprised by how much progress we've made. I look back at 2016 and 17, and I look at our product UI, and I do cringe. And I'm sure I'll look back in 2025, 2026 and cringe at what we have now. But there's definitely forward progress, and I think that's a good thing for the ecosystem in general, right? So to me, it's been a fun journey, but a lot of learning that I didn't quite anticipate going in, but it's been super gratifying.
I think it's important to be able to look back 5 years and say, wow, I can't believe this is what we were doing at the time, because you're just constantly improving and iterating. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it would be a bad thing if you look back and you're like, oh, wow, 5 years ago, we were doing things really well.
Totally.
Because I look at some of our proposals and case studies and just all of our materials from when I started Electric in 2019, and they're just awful. Like I would have never said yes to us now being in my position at this time. So it's just funny to see the evolution as everybody in the entire ecosystem just ups the bar in terms of expectation.
I hear you, and that totally resonates.
So wanted to touch on your growth as a company and an org. Sort of how have you managed, especially during COVID, building out and scaling a team? I mean, it seems like you've been growing pretty quickly over the past couple of years as well. So how have you gone about bringing on those first team members and having some sort of a company culture, especially when everything is remote for the most part?
Yeah, I think the everything is remote was something that, to be very honest, we were building for a remote future even pre-COVID, and at that time, if you said that out loud, people looked at you weird, and that just wasn't the way to build a company. Even though you had examples like Envision and Buffer and all of these folks that had scaled it to amazing levels while being remote. GitLab, another example that IPO'd, right? It still wasn't considered smart, and so we were sort of hybrid back then. And then COVID just made it easy to say, oh, now being remote is cool, and everybody, that's the norm. And so that was the first push. In terms of growing the team, I think we've been, you're right, we have grown very rapidly over the last 24 months, but we've also grown on the back of actual customer and revenue growth. So we turned profitable early 2020, and we've tried to keep that fiscal discipline. So we don't invest overly aggressively. We try and keep pace with what our own growth is as a company and where the demands are growing. And we're trying to treat it, like you said, more and more like a collection, like a portfolio of products that we're building, and so staffing from that perspective, such that each product has a responsibility to get to default alive state is the mindset. I think one of the challenges of remote that we anticipated and not sure that we've fully solved it yet is, how do you make sure that the accountability is not lost? How do you make sure that the sense of ownership is consistent across the entire team? And how do you get everyone on the same page and keep them there? And that has been a challenge, I won't lie. I think we have people now in 40 plus cities across the globe. So we try and meet up. We used to do one annual offsite. Now we're doing multiple ones every few months. So we're not spending on office space. Instead, we're taking that money and making sure that we get some FaceTime, every 16 weeks or so. So we're doing our next one in a couple of weeks here, and that's a good opportunity for us to have those in-person interactions. But really, I think the truth is, it comes down to hiring and hiring people with the right mindset, who are ownership driven, who are motivated by the right things, and who are hungry to make an impact and do right by the customer. So we put a lot of emphasis, a lot of effort on our hiring process. I still talk to every single candidate that we interview. In fact, I'm usually the first conversation that happens, and I focus less on their resume, less on their pedigree, and a lot more on why are you even interested in coming to us, and what are you hoping to get out of this? And that's been such a revelation, right? Like there are people that are genuinely happy to make a contribution, make an impact, and they want the freedom of being wherever they are and continuing to contribute. So bring the right people in, make sure that the vision and the clarity in the vision is just totally established and consistent, and we're very goal driven in how we think about our day-to-day execution. So the goals derive from the vision. Everybody takes ownership of their goals, and my job is to make sure that we facilitate and support those efforts as best as we can. But if you do that, more often than not, it takes care of itself. Obviously there'll always be the odd apples, and so you want to make sure that your execution tracking mechanism allows you to catch those scenarios, those exceptions when they happen, and you try to course correct. And in some rare cases where it doesn't course correct, you have to move on and part ways because it's just not a good fit. It's nothing against the individual. It could very well be that you're not the right environment for them either, right? And so I think we try to keep a very open mind about that. And so far, I'm very proud of the fact that we've gotten that more right than we've gotten wrong. We have had our mistakes, but by far, I have to say I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out.
I think for me, the first thing I think about when a team member leaves, quits, is like, was there something that we could have done differently to empower them or set them up better for success? And in some cases, the answer is no. Like, it just wasn't the right fit, or we've actually allowed them to now go get a better job and in an industry that they actually might have wanted to be in. And so like electric allowed them to work here for like a year and a half, and then they move on to what their goal was all along, which is awesome. I think that's a great place to be in as well as an employer.
Yeah.
But the accountability side of things is definitely challenging in a remote environment, because you're not there in the day-to-day, and especially as the company gets larger and larger and larger, you start to lose controls on and not everybody is able to just have complete freedom and be able to still execute against what their responsibilities are. And I think meeting in person is really important, not only outside of collaboration, but just building more of a bond and feeling more connected to the team. But if you're just logging in, looking at a Zoom, it's completely impersonal, and you're going to, I think, have more employee turnover as a byproduct of that as well.
Yeah. So does your team, do you all meet up, fairly frequently in terms of just getting the whole team together?
Yeah, so we have like our team primarily based in San Diego to start, and then we started to bring on a couple of like remote team members, and we flew everybody out for a holiday party in 2021, which is really cool to get to meet people for the first time. And then we'll do some offsite stuff in particular like locations. But what we really want to do this year, and unfortunately we have a office lease that we're trying to get out of from the company that acquired us. They signed it, I want to say like right before COVID, maybe like a year before COVID. But we still have that. So like the money that's going towards that ideally would be going to like quarterly, hey, let's all get together. Yeah. But when you got 120 employees spread out across the US, like bringing people together for 2 days, that is a sizable cost. So we do things like weekly happy hours and things that are virtual. And then we'll do sort of mini get-togethers within the hubs that we have. We have a lot of people in LA, we have a lot of people in New York, a fair amount of people in Florida, and so we can all get together. But what we want to get to this year is having that sort of quarterly, like offsite or biannual offsite, where we can bring the full team together for a full week too, not just like a day. Because if we're going to do it, we should do it and like actually get to work and have fun, but also get like working sessions in too. So that's sort of where our head is at. But if I were going to start a company from the ground up right now, I would not do, I couldn't do remote. I would need like the founding team in person to be able to share and collaborate and have feedback. And in an ideal world, would have a hybrid team where like maybe we're in office 2 or 3 days, but then still have the flexibility for remote. Because I think it's really difficult as an early stage startup to do the things you need to if you're completely disconnected. There's just so much that happens in person that can't be replicated online.
Yeah, and we bring on a lot of college hires. I think the last 2 years, I think right now 1/3 of our team is college hires who, Swym was their first place of employment. Just the osmosis that happens, serendipitously where they're learning. I feel bad that they don't have that opportunity, and you're not going to be able to do that on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever, right? Like those are, around the coffee table, or it's a it's a water cooler conversation thing that we miss out on. So hopefully that's something that we can address with the whole hub model that you're talking about. We might do it slightly differently, but I hear you. If I was starting out and it was just the founding team, we probably would want to be together.
Yeah, and I think that person-to-person interaction is super important, and employers need to start thinking about how their sort of work environment also impacts the personal lives of their employees. Because let's say you're hiring somebody who's like 50 and has a family and like they're very well established and settled. They probably don't really care about going into the office and like getting to intermingle with all their colleagues. But we had a team member quit who just came out of college because she was still living at home with her parents, and like she would just log on every day from her bedroom to a Zoom, and then like she was just basically like dying of boredom, and needed that human interaction with peers her age. So I was like, how are you? I'd be going crazy too. Like you need to go find a job that is in person so you can meet people and like have a life essentially.
Totally.
So
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I can definitely empathize with that situation.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else that you want to sort of impart on our listeners before we hop off here?
No, I think we covered everything, Brandon. I loved your, the sequence that you walked us through in terms of your line of questioning. I don't think I have anything to add. It was a total pleasure. I'm glad I had the chance to do this. So thank you again for the opportunity and for having me. Yeah,
thanks for coming on. Before we hop off, can you let everybody know where they can find you and Swym online?
Yeah, so Swym's on Twitter. We're at Swymit, SWYMIT is our handle, and I am Arvind Dax, so ARVINDAX, also on Twitter. And then of course you can find both Swym and me on LinkedIn. So those are the 2 places where we hang out the most.
Awesome. I'll drop those in the show notes as well so that people can reach out. Thank you everybody for listening. As always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com or electricmarketing.com. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.